This report documents several CIA plans to falsely manufacture reasons to justify attacking Cuba. One of these involved the Mercury flight of John Glenn. The CIA suggested that if the flight failed, then evidence should be manufactured to put the blame on Cuba. The idea being to falsely manufacture various pieces of evidence that somehow the Cubans had used electronic interference to bring down the spacecraft. Jarrah suggests that NASA or the US government, given the evidence from the CIA document, may have gone so far as to murder the Apollo 1 astronauts to protect the moon landing hoax. There could well have been concerns that the outspoken Gus Grissom may have been inclined to talk too much about what NASA were doing or planning. Certainly, the family of Gus Grissom believed that he was intentionally eliminated by NASA, as this video from Frank Matt explains. Thomas Barron was a safety inspector during the Apollo 1's construction. After the fire in the Apollo 1 capsule, he testified before Congress that the Apollo program was in such disarray that NASA would never make it to the moon. He had submitted a detailed 500-page report to Congress detailing his findings. He believed that his opinions made him a target and that he reported that he and his family had been harassed. 1 week after he testified, his car was struck by a train and he, his wife, and stepdaughter died in the accident. The accident was officially judged to be suicide. Some skeptics, the foremost being Bill Kaysing, believed that Barron was murdered to silence him. It is interesting to note that Barron's report on the failings of the NASA Apollo project disappeared and have never been found. The Clavius website had another more critical assessment of Thomas Barron and indicated that he was somewhat overzealous in his work. However, it does make the point that if NASA were going to silence him, then why wait after he had presented his evidence to Congress? It would have been more logical to have him silenced before and then gain the damning details of his investigation may not have been known beforehand. Although his original report has been lost or purposefully disposed of, you can get some idea of his claims in this excerpt. You can read Barron's testimony to Congress on the Clavius website.
Home sweet home.
Travelers never lie, therefore fools at home condemn them. William Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. I am sure what we all yearned to see was a view of that beautiful globe of shining blue of Earth from far out in space, and the Apollo missions to the moon gave us this opportunity. The view of our Earth from out in deep space did not disappoint. On all Apollo live missions, the astronauts went to considerable effort to film the Earth from deep space, usually from about halfway to the moon or about 130,000 miles distant from the Earth. These TV broadcasts were the highlights of the journey to the moon, and audiences all around the world were in awe of our diminutive planet floating solidarily in the blackness of space. Some skeptics maintain that in fact these images were fake and that the live TV transmissions were not broadcast live but were recorded to be broadcast at a later time. The skeptics suggest that this was to ensure that the trickery looked plausible before broadcasting it to the world. The skeptics also question, where are the photographs of the Earth? Did we really take the trouble and considerable effort to venture all the way to the moon and not look back at our home planet and take some odd snapshot? Well, unbelievably, according to our skeptics, it seems we didn't. Being a little cynical, we may perhaps assume that there were far more pressing matters like enjoying the bouncing up and down in reduced gravity or photographing a few rocks and your best astronaut companion. Hold on a minute, I hear some of you wildly protesting. No doubt you believe that you have seen many photographs of the Earth taken during the Apollo missions, but a word of caution here. The skeptics warn us to try to distinguish between the real photographs and manufactured images. I must admit that I also thought that I had seen many beautiful photographs of the Earth from the moon. As we will see later, it is alleged by our skeptics that many of the so-called photographs and even videos of the Earth from Apollo missions may not be what we think. So keep an open mind and listen to what our believer and our skeptics have to say on this matter.
Photographs of Earth.
We have already discussed in Chapter 8 that the skeptics are adamant in that there appears to be no convincingly genuine photographs of the Earth from the Apollo missions. There are quite a few photographs of the Earth which the skeptics assert are not genuine photographs, but more probably manufactured by various means. They suspect that many have been assembled using a cutout from the Earth image superimposed onto the photographs. Their evidence for this appears to be based on two facts. Firstly, some of the file headers show that the photographs had been amended in Photoshop, and secondly, that there are artifacts around the edges of some of the components in the images. We will discuss these in detail. For example, skeptic Conscious Truth has analyzed the photograph of the Earth taken on the Apollo 17 mission as they were on their way to the Moon. This is, in fact, a 5-part video series of investigation. In his analysis in the first video, he has a problem with the colors, particularly the blueness of the oceans, which he imagines should be much grayer and lighter. This is a strange comment, as one needs to take into consideration the color palette of each photograph, which is more than likely to vary between each photograph. Also, he notes that the coloring is strange for a sphere in that the center would normally be brighter than the edges, similarly to when you view a ball. He contends that in this photograph, the Earth looks rather flat. I am in agreement with that observation. He then compares the NASA image with a composite image from Google Earth and says that he sees major differences in the size of Africa and the size position of Madagascar. There is another video which perhaps better explains his analysis. From his investigations, Conscious Truth concludes that this may well be the smoking gun. Well, I am not sure about a smoking gun. When I look closely at the supposed fit of the Blue Orb Earth image and the Google Earth image, I do not see the same precise match as Conscious Truth sees. For me, the Google Earth image appears to be a closer view of the Earth, something which is mentioned in our next video. Well, that may be the opinion of Conscious Truth, but the believers have another idea. Take for example True Believer, Greater Sapien, who has a ready explanation of skeptic Conscious Truth's dilemma regarding the strange size of Africa. He maintains that it is simply a matter of how close you are when you are taking the photograph. If you look at a ball from a distance, then you can see the whole face of the ball, but if you move closer and closer, then part of the face disappears behind the edges. We will meet this effect later on when we examine more moon photographs. Our next contribution to the debate is from Jordan, who I assume to be a skeptic in that he or she questions the validity of the Earthrise photograph taken on Apollo 11. The Moon rotates on its axis and revolves around the Earth at the same rate, so the same side of the Moon always faces the Earth. Thus, we say that the Moon is tidally locked to the Earth. He examines the position of the Apollo 11 landing site, and he maintains that the Earthrise photograph is impossible. He states that the Earth would be higher in the sky and should appear much larger. I am not entirely convinced by his analysis of this photograph. The photograph was supposedly taken from the spacecraft high above the Moon's surface, and therefore the Earth would actually be even lower when viewed from the surface. His other observation, that the Earth should be somewhat larger, may have some merit and is something that we will discuss later in detail. On this business of editing photographs of the Earth, we have this submission from God Rules, in which he examines the photographs in detail. Using the software Photoshop, he examines the Apollo 11 Earth photography by adjusting simultaneously the brightness and the contrast to reveal quite strange evidence that the photograph has been edited. He maintains that the only real photographs of the Earth from Apollo missions are those taken from low Earth orbit. However, the believer masquerading under the YouTube name of BKM83442 has other ideas and sets about to prove that the photographs of the Earthrise above the Moon is, without dispute, a real photograph. He uses a very clever technique to show that the photograph was actually taken at the correct time and shows reasonably convincing evidence that it is a true photograph of the Earth. He examines the orientation of the Earth, and he believes that it could only have been taken on the date that the Apollo 11 was at the correct position and altitude above the Moon. The photograph used in the above analysis, I believe, was AS11-44-6559, which can be downloaded from the NASA image gallery. Of course, the skeptics will tell you that NASA had the eminent mathematicians, so even if it was faked, you would expect them to have got it correct.
Earth too small and Earth phase wrong.
Houston, we have a problem. The Earth is shrinking and looking extremely lopsided in the Apollo sky. Although there are only a few photographs and even fewer videos showing the Earth from the Moon, the skeptics are not even happy with the few that do exist. Skeptics just wouldn't be skeptics if they didn't have something to complain about. Now we have a debate between the skeptics and believers about the size of the Earth, or to be more precise, how large the Earth should look on Apollo photographs and videos. We all know how the Moon looks from the Earth and its distinct phases with full and crescent moons. Presumably, science dictates exactly how the Earth would look even when viewed from the Moon, but it seems that it is not so straightforward, at least if you follow our skeptics and believers' arguments. We will let YouTube poster The Quagmire explain everything. I have watched his videos several times, and I am still not sure how large the Earth would look from the Moon. However, our skeptic Hunchbacked seems to think that in the iconic Apollo 17 showing Jack Schmitt, the US flag and the Earth, NASA image AS17-134-20384, the Earth image is far too small and uses some clever optical analysis to demonstrate his point. I must admit that I do not completely understand this business of camera optics, focal lengths, angles of view, hoping you do. Believer Bertie Slack has other ideas and sets out his own logic to show that the Earth is in fact the correct size. He talks about how to do the maths to prove that the Earth is the correct size, but unfortunately does not show the method or any results. Our Bertie Slack does not let it rest there either. He has produced another video to reiterate that the Earth has the correct size as shown in the NASA photograph, and that he has a message for Hunchbacked. His basic point is that the relative size of the Moon in NASA photographs is a function of the angle of the camera lens used, but this appears to be what Hunchbacked demonstrated in his video. In this video, Bertie Slack again accuses Hunchbacked of not doing the maths, but totally fails to do any maths himself and simply gives his opinion rather than demonstrating the fact. It may have cleared things up if he had done the maths rather than leaving it for the viewer to do. Hunchbacked now examines the consistency in the video taken on the Moon in Apollo 17 and the camera on the lunar rover's zoom out. He notes the start and end of the zoom sequence. His contention is that when you zoom in, all objects increase in size by the same amount, and likewise when you zoom out, all the objects decrease by the same amount in size. To test this logic, he measures the diameter of the Moon in two photographs and the distance of the Moon above the horizon. The ratio between the diameter and height should be the same in both photographs. According to his calculations, they are not the same, being 1.30 and 1.54, and supposes that some fakery is in the sequence. However, he does not provide any reason why this would happen and what fakery may be involved. His rather inaccurate method of measuring the sizes from his screen may be the reason for this unexpected result. Hunchbacked continues his results of the anomalies in the Moon photographs. First of all, he looks at the angle of the Earth's terminator line in the NASA photograph AS17-137-20958 and calculates that he thinks the angle of the terminator should be and finds a total discrepancy of 13 degrees. As far as I understand his reasoning, the accuracy of the calculations entirely depends on him knowing the true horizontal of the photograph. A slight estimate may itself introduce the magnitude of error he found.
Superimposition.
As mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are many skeptics who claim that the photograph of the Earth as seen has been superimposed onto another photograph. Perhaps before we talk about this subject, we need to remind ourselves of how the NASA photographs were produced. The original photographs were taken on film which cannot be stored in a computer file until they have been digitized before they can be uploaded to the internet. So, the film needed to be scanned by NASA to produce the digital images we are all familiar with. The original films are stored by NASA in the Film Archive building at Johnson Space Center in a freezer at a chilling 0 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve the film. The original film is never allowed to leave the JSC. The photographs needed to be scanned, and this was done with a very high-resolution Leica DSW-700 photogrammetric scanner. We have many skeptics who complain that NASA in some way has altered the photographs. Well, that should not be a surprise, as NASA freely admit exactly how they processed the original photographs. Here is an abstract from a paper which summarizes the scanning process. Image processing notes. The scans of the Apollo flight films are processed using a standard set of procedures. First, the unexposed portion of the film along the edges of a scanned frame are cropped and the frame is straightened. Second, the background is removed from all of the scans by assuming that the average DN values of the unexposed regions at the edge of each row scanned image represent the background, i.e. film base and fog. Third, a flat view correction, derived from the actual image data, removes vignetting to the first order. Fourth, a residue pattern, the small crosses visible on the Apollo images published elsewhere, are removed from the images. Fifth, a logarithmic histogram transformation is applied to the image. This is necessary because of the logarithmic response of film, which makes the raw scans appear very contrasty. Since photographic paper also has a logarithmic response and reverses the film response, conventional paper prints have a natural contrast range. The logarithmic histogram correction applied to the scanned images therefore produces a vital print that simulates the natural contrast of a conventional paper print. Sixth, since the uncompressed images produced by the initial scanning process result in extremely large images, the scale is reduced by a factor corresponding to the square root of 2, which serves to reduce the image size by 50%, and the images are converted from 16-bit to 8-bit. The original unprocessed raw scans are also provided on this website in full resolution 16-bit TIFF format. So clearly the scanning process is not a straightforward matter, and NASA make no secret of it. If you read the full paper, then you will observe that there is a considerable manipulation of the digital files, and these were also produced in different file sizes, starting from the highest resolution image and producing lesser quality images from the file compression. So, what happens when files are compressed? Suppose you were to reduce a file by 50%, as NASA states, from say a size 1800 by 1200 pixels to 900 by 600. The total number of pixels in the image would be reduced from 2.16 million to 0.54 million pixels, a reduction by a factor of 4. This means that 1 in every 4 pixels has to go. So how is this done and still keep a reasonable semblance of the original image? Most types of computer image files contain a large amount of redundancy. They have the same information listed over and over again. For example, the same colored pixel. File compression programs simply get rid of the redundancy. Instead of listing a piece of information over and over again, a file compression program lists that information once and then refers back to it whenever it appears in the original program. So image formats such as a BMP or a TIFF file have no compression at all and still retain every pixel, but some files can be quite large for the detailed image. So let's take a further look at the problems some skeptics see in the NASA Apollo photographs. Here is a typical example of the many on YouTube from the skeptic Truth Rising. In this video, the presenter examines the iconic photograph showing Harrison Schmitt, the American flag, with the Earth in the background. Using Photoshop, he asserts that the Earth has been superimposed onto the photograph. He adjusts the levels in the photograph and sees a box around the Earth, which he says shows that the image has been falsified by NASA. Later in the video, he shows a similar effect with the LRO photograph of the Earthrise. All very convincing evidence of some NASA fakery. We also have similar evidence of NASA photoshopping the images from Paul on the plane. This video is part 1 of a 5-part series. In the first video in the series, he examines the supposed photograph of the Deep Space Climate Observatory, DISCOVER, and its epic camera of the transit of the Moon across the face of the Earth in 2015. He shows beyond any doubt that the images are again composites. The implication is that NASA is still trying to pass off composite photographs as being real as late as 2015. I need to mention that there are many other skeptics who have the same problems with NASA falsely altering photographs. Well, not necessarily so, says Greater Sapien, as he shows his version of what we are really seeing. In his video, he examines the strange colored blobs shown around the Earth, and the levels on the photograph are increased. He shows quite convincingly that what we are seeing are what are known as artifacts left over from JPEG compression algorithm. However, this does not explain the boxes around the Earth identified by Paul on the plane. In our next video from Believer, the T Guy, he discusses square gray boxes around the Earth in the Earthrise photograph from the LRO, which he attributes to the analysis of the wrong resolution photograph being used by the skeptics. He also explains that NASA do state on the website that they amended the photograph to add the colorization and make a composite image, so no mystery there. This question of NASA falsely altering photographs using Photoshop is a perennial accusation from the skeptics, and it is raised time and time again. Believer Bertie Slack has something to add to this debate as he discusses JPEG file compression. He demonstrates clearly that the artifacts are introduced by the JPEG compression algorithm. In a second video, Bertie Slack examines another cause of apparent Photoshop manipulation by NASA as he responds to a video by one William Wagner relating to a photograph from Apollo 11. Unfortunately, I cannot show the original video as it has been deleted and the Wayback Machine did not archive it. We must assume that it was deleted by William Wagner himself once he saw Bertie Slack's valid explanation. So we may wonder why all of this excitement about photoshopped images. NASA freely admit that they do compress photographs and explain exactly how they do it, so no surprise there. Our skeptics jump up and down every time they discover these artifacts and scream NASA falsifies the photographs. I am not saying that NASA doesn't falsify some photographs, we just do not know, but finding artifacts on a compressed image is what we would expect due to the compression algorithms used. Try it yourself. Take any photograph you find on the internet. Pop it into Photoshop or any other imaging editing program such as freewarepaint.net. Play with the brightness and contrast as you've seen our believers and skeptics do and look for the artifacts. You will be hard-pressed to find any photographic images that do not show you some artifacts, particularly at the border between the light and dark areas. Similarly, you are likely to find the text Adobe or Duck in the file header. Does this mean that all of these images are fake? Perhaps not. Before we finish with our investigation into the Apollo Earth photographs, we need one final submission from Leonard Konovalov entitled Shadows in the Lunar Sky, posted on the Owlus website. He analyzes the now iconic Harrison-Schmitt photograph using Schmitt, the US flag, and the Earth, which we have seen before. He shows quite definitively, or at least for me, that this photograph has been constructed and hence it is fake. However, NASA maintain that this is a genuine photograph, but do not answer the findings by Konovalov. I have also been unable to find any reference to this analysis by any believer.
Video of Earth from deep space.
Now we will examine the endlessly debated live video of a distant Earth view transmitted by the astronauts as they were about halfway to the Moon. This is perhaps one of the most discussed elements of the Apollo moon landings. It concerns videos of the Earth which were taken by the Apollo astronauts from the command module as they were some distance from the Earth at about 130,000 miles out. These videos for our believers represent the absolute positive proof that the Apollo missions did go far beyond the Earth's inner orbit and through the supposedly deadly Van Allen radiation belts and onto the Moon. Conversely, our skeptics suggest that this video was for them clearly faked, and it is absolute proof that man did not go to the Moon. The skeptics argue that if you had genuinely been to the Moon, then there would have been no reason to fake the video footage. As is often the case in our Moon story, we have two opposing interpretations of the same evidence, so let's see what we can discover for ourselves. First of all, we will watch the unedited version of one of the television transmissions from the astronauts on Apollo 11 as they were about halfway to the Moon. It is important that you see this video without any narration, just the conversation between Houston and the Apollo astronauts. From this, you can better form your own opinion on what is going on. The controversy was sparked off in January of 2001 when skeptic Bart Sibrel released a video, "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon." According to Bart Sibrel, this Apollo 11 TV transmission video was delivered to him from an anonymous NASA informant. It is this video that forms the basis of Bart Sibrel's revelations in his video, although he does cover much of the anomalies suggested by other skeptics. The first part of Bart Sibrel's video sets the global political and economic scenario of the 1960s and the world's fear concerning the uncertainties of the Cold War. The middle section presents many of the well-repeated conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, I think that the video does contain several errors. It states that shadows must always be parallel and never intersect. This is given as proof that additional light sources were used. The shadow argument is probably erroneous, as we discover in video 13. When viewed from any point, shadows must intersect at some vanishing point, so they cannot be parallel, even though they are parallel on the ground. It mentions the crosshair anomaly as being evidence of possible NASA fakery, which again was basically discounted in video 13. Finally, it mentions the absence of a blast crater below the lander as proof of some fakery. In doing this, it states that the descent engine was rated at 10,000 pounds thrust, but fails to mention that the point at touchdown, the engine would have been much less, throttled back. NASA state it was throttled back to only 3,000 pounds thrust, but at the final touchdown, probably much less. Also, we have already commented perhaps beneath the lander is the wrong place to look for any signs of the blast crater, as the lunar lander had lateral movement just before touchdown. Finally, it states that the astronauts never took a photographic telescope, but again we have seen in video 9 taken by the astronauts on Apollo 16 with a telescope from the moon, albeit only in the ultraviolet spectrum. Just to correct one more thing. The video emphatically states about Neil Armstrong that he has never given one on-camera interview to anyone ever. This is not actually correct, and while it is true that Neil Armstrong did not give many interviews in the period following the moon landings, he did give interviews later on, but after Bart Sibrel's video was produced. However, he did give an interview in 1970 on the BBC television show Sky at Night, in which he was interviewed by Patrick Moore. We will discuss the implications of this interview in detail later in this video series, so it was important that I mention it here. As far as I can ascertain, this video was not posted on the internet until 2009, so Bart Sibrel can be forgiven for not being aware of it. The interesting part of the video starts at 32 minutes when the narrator describes an old reel of NASA footage allegedly received by the BBC from NASA, supposedly by mistake. The video claims to show the Apollo 11 astronauts disingenuously faking that they were 130,000 miles from the Earth, when in fact, the video suggests that they were only in low Earth orbit. For many of our skeptics, this is another smoking gun. For if the Apollo missions really went to the moon, then there would be no reason to produce such a fake video of the distant Earth. The film bears the undated main title caption, "This film of the Apollo 11 mission was produced as a report film by the Manned Spacecraft Center and is not for general public distribution." According to Sibrel, it is newly discovered, unedited, compromising behind-the-scenes footage of falsely filming the Apollo 11, the alleged first manned mission to the moon. He states that it contains outtakes of blatant fake photography filmed from low Earth orbit by the crew as they created the false illusion that they were, instead, halfway to the moon. This is the descriptive text attached to the YouTube video. Sibrel's video quote. Notice at the beginning of the reel, at time frame :23, that the CIA accidentally left the microphone on their private channel conversation with the astronauts, in which they prompt them to talk only after 4 seconds had elapsed since hearing the initial remarks from NASA. This deliberate pause was done to create the effect of an increased radio delay so as to appear to be farther away from the Earth than they really were. Notice at time 1:26:22 that the command module, allegedly orbiting the moon at 4,000 miles per hour, is at a complete stop above the moon's surface, which is mathematically impossible if the missions were real. From a standstill, the spacecraft then accelerates back to 4,000 miles per hour in 1 second. At time 1:35:50, a small model of the supposed descending lunar module is used, with a photographic copy of the previous lunar landscape being projected in the background, now at a much lower resolution because it is a second-generated projected copy. In the film business, this special effect is called rear screen projection. Proof of this film special effect is seen in the optical sharpness of the spacecraft model, yet with the faded resolution of the projected copy of the lunar background, no longer with the optical sharpness as when previously seen first generation by itself. At time 1:10:26, you will see a newly discovered unedited clip of never-before-seen outtakes of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin allegedly walking on the moon's surface. They, or the two actors in the spacesuits, zigzagging back and forth over and over again in the dirt to deliberately add additional footprints to the studio set and prepare for the next scene, supposedly a significant time later. At time 1:11:21, one of the players walks around in circles kicking up dirt over their previous footprints in an attempt to do a second take with a fresh footprint. They also motion to a third party off camera with hand signals pointing to and drawing their attention to the spot in the soil that needs attention for additional filming. Seeing how every second of this $140 billion mission costs about $1 million of today's dollars, why are they spending $1 million a second on their most valuable and life-enduring time on a maiden voyage to the moon, zigzagging all over the place to unnecessarily add additional footprints, and then later walking around in circles kicking up dirt to cover up their same footprints, all for the view of the camera? Interestingly as well, at time 1:34 and 1:20:55 is the identifying title of the original, never-before-seen beginning slate of the film, Test. This is an interdepartmental motion picture industry term for special effects. Additionally, the date of the newly discovered slate proves that it was, in fact, filmed 5 days before the crew even left for the moon.